Hi folks, Thomas Simpson here with thomassinson.com, and today is another episode of Big Data, Big Questions. And so today we're going to be talking about the 5 different kind of buckets in Splunk. So we're going to go through, we're going to talk about, how Splunk uses buckets and how it's used to be able to store your data and how to know which bucket your data is in. So find out more about the different buckets in Splunk right after this. So today we're going to be going through the 5 different buckets in Splunk, and we're going to be talking about that. If you have a question, remember, throw it in the comment section here below. Find me on Twitter, on Instagram, and I'll do my best to answer those here on the show. So today I wanted to go through the different kind of buckets and how those are used in Splunk. So before we jump in and talk about those 5 different buckets, let's just get a quick definition of how Splunk kind of works with storing our data. So think about our data coming into our Splunk environment. The first thing that's going to happen is whether we're uploading it or whether it's live streaming data, it's going to be indexed. And so that index is going to help us, one, be able to search it a little bit better. So Splunk's going to put a timestamp on it, and it's going to do some other things to give us some metadata so that we can simply search through that data a lot quicker in our Splunk environment. The other thing it's going to do is it's going to store that data so we can find it. So it's going to store those in different buckets. So think of buckets just as the Splunk file system. So just like you have a file system, think of it in a Windows environment, right? So I've got directories and subdirectories. Think of it in the Splunk environment as you have different buckets, right? I have buckets for different portions of my data. Those are all going to be with a timestamp, right. So as it indexes, that's how Splunk decides where they're going to be in the buckets. And also there's some other things you can do to decide how long data is going to sit in each one of your buckets. But before we jump in and talk about that, let's make sure we understand what those buckets are. So the first bucket, or really the first 2 buckets, are going to be your hot and your warm bucket. And so your hot and your warm bucket, this is where your most recent data is going to be. So your hot and your warm bucket, they're both going to sit in the same specific area. They're going to be put in there so that you have your data the most current, right? So this is where Splunk really puts a lot of performance characteristics around where this data should live in these hot and warm buckets. And specifically, really, if you think about it, your hot and your warm bucket's going to contain some of your most recent data, but your hot bucket is going to be the one that's writing to the new data, right? So as you set up your policies for where your data, how long your data is going to exist in your Splunk buckets, your hot and your warm bucket, so let's say that, arbitrarily you can get 10 events, right? Like it's a little bit more complicated than that, but let's just make it simple. Say that you can get 10 events in your buckets. So every time you get to 10 events, your hot bucket is going to become a warm bucket and you have a brand new bucket. So think of your hot bucket is where the newest files go and your warm bucket is where your more recent is, right? So it gives you a lifecycle policy. The third kind of bucket is a cold bucket. So this is where our more older data, right? Where our data is kind of aging off. So this data can actually doesn't have to live with a hot and a warm bucket. It can go to maybe a NAS device or, some kind of object store where you can actually search on it. So it still needs to have some requirements for how it's being searched because, it could be, if we're saying that we have 10 events in each one of our warm buckets, let's say that, after a week, those 10 events age off to our cold bucket. So our cold bucket could hold, from a week to maybe 3 months on our policy. And so that's where our data is going to exist in that cold bucket. So no new data is being written to it. And there's not as much performance requirements just because probably not searching on it as frequently as we are on the newer events, right? That are pulling out for our dashboard that are stored in our hot and our warm buckets. And then we have our 4th bucket, which is going to be our frozen bucket. So think of this as like really old, frozen data, hence the frozen bucket, but data that we're, holding on to for compliance reasons, or we just want to be able to go back and search on it at some point in the past. But this data is actually going off to like, some kind of long-term retention, right? Now, the thing about it is, if we want to search on it, I'll talk about it in just a second, but this data is not searchable in its current form of a frozen bucket. So there's another process to be able to do that, and that'll include another bucket, but think of this as where you're aging off your data, right? Like this gives you an opportunity to, get a better cost per terabyte, for how you're storing the data and get it out of your Splunk search. So, better performance on your Splunk search as well, but still being able to hold on to that data. But think of this as, if we're saying that 3 months is what we're going to hold in our cold bucket, think of it being more than 3 months that's going to exist in that frozen bucket. And our last bucket, number 5, just talked about it. It's a thawed bucket. So our thawed bucket is actually how we get that frozen data back into a searchable state. And so you can go through and being able to thaw that bucket out. So think of it as, taking some of the compression out of it, but also, putting it in a better place to be able to store it, right? We talked about performance and some of the other characteristics that you need to be able to search your data. In those thawed buckets is where you can start and go from that process. So it's a full life cycle process, right? Go from hot to warm to cold to frozen, and then when we want to see our data again, put it in that thawed bucket. So that's all we have today. I hope you enjoyed this episode where we talked about the 5 different kind of buckets in Splunk. So if you have any questions, make sure you put them in the comment section here below. Reach out to me on Big Data Big Questions, and I'll do my best to answer your questions right here.